What's going on, everyone? Today we're once again talking about a new build in Remnant 2. I like to call this one the Reckless Outlaw, as it uses the cowboy-like armor with a massive bullet-spraying machine gun. This one's actually really good because Remnant 2 likes to throw bosses in the mix that hide their weak spot. Since we'll be removing all weak spot from our character entirely, we get huge critical hits and don't need to aim all that well either. For the footage today, I played in Nightmare. The build will be too easy on Survivor, extremely good on Veteran, and a very solid option on Nightmare. Be aware there's a bit of room to play around here with some of the items, as bosses resistant to acid might be much easier with fire, or vice versa. For our main class, we'll be selecting the Gunslinger. This is a pretty nutty class, granting huge upgrades to gunplay. We need it for the Prime perk that instantly reloads our weapon when you cast a Gunslinger skill. The weapon we'll be using has a long reload speed, and this lets us not even have to reload most of the time. We'll also be using the skill Bullet Storm, as it ups the fire rate of guns by 20%. This provides much more damage in a shorter amount of time, as well as building up mod power very quickly. Overall, the Gunslinger will keep our ammo full all the time and increase our damage and crit chance. As for the subclass, we'll be taking Hunter, a sort of unfair class as it gets one of the biggest passive upgrades in the game. 40% more range damage and 5% range critical hit chance. When maining guns as your source of damage, this is too good of a buff to pass up. As for the skills, you'll most often be using Hunter's Shroud. This marks the enemy when you shoot and grants 50% more range damage. It's the ideal choice for boss fights, however, the Hunter's mark is much better in open areas. Mobs of enemies can swarm you, and on harder difficulties, it's better to just know exactly where they're going to be coming from. Marking an enemy also increases crit chance by 15%. With both classes, you're getting that crit chance up there and making sure the range damage is solid. The skills don't keep you alive, but will focus on pure damage output. Armor for this build consists of the full High Noon set. You can buy it at Ward 13 or start as the Gunslinger to get it. Instead of the gauntlets, however, we will be running the Radiant Bracers. If you don't have them, that's fine, but I think they look really good for an outlaw that doesn't mind heavy machinery. The defenses aren't anything crazy with this stuff, but we aren't in the negative, which is what's important. Relics are a bit weird in this game as they can provide some interesting buffs, but a lot of the situations in which those buffs operate are very specific. I recommend the relic you're most comfortable with, although the Dragon Heart is good for consistent healing. The Siphon Heart grants a lifesteal, which can be useful depending on how you're going to use it, and the Resonating Heart could be a good option as well. For Relic Fragments, we get really nice upgrades from ranged critical chance, ranged critical damage, and ranged damage. The crit damage and chance ones being very vital for the build, so upgrade them as soon as possible. The main gun you want to run is the Bonesaw. This has a huge supply of ammo before you need to reload and will shoot at a very high rate of fire. You can buy it from Barabbas at the firing range or select the medic at the start of the game. When running a more automatic weapon, you're going to have a much better chance to get critical hits. With more bullets being thrown out, it's just logical to expect the extra damage at a higher rate. To make this as efficient as possible, we're going to need two things. First, a corrosive rounds weapon mod. This can be used to imbue your bullets with acid, which corrodes enemies dealing damage over time, but the real kicker is that the acid increased ranged critical chance by 15%, meaning when the mod is active, you get a lot more critical hits instead of regular ones. Then we throw on the Momentum Mutator, which means critical hits increase critical chance up to about 30%. At level 10, you can get even more, which makes this mutator highly valuable and one of the best in the game. With this on your weapon, you're mostly hitting critical after it heats up a bit. One thing to note is that the Bonesaw does have the downside of being able to overheat. I thought this would be more annoying than it is, since after you get used to it, you kind of back off before reaching that point. You just need to pay attention to it, but it really shouldn't mess with the gameplay at all. For your melee weapon, I don't really care. Nothing we have helps melee, so go nuts with it. For your secondary, however, we do want the Tech 22. This is an extremely good weapon for gunslinger users as it has a high fire rate and holds a lot of bullets. The fast reload and decent range make it excellent at many different situations. Since it also is a bullet sprayer, our critical chance works for both our guns. Now, for our weapon mod, I run Vargazer as it's the most low maintenance mod in Remnant 2. You activate it and then just switch guns and start mowing down enemies. Vargazer will lay out a beam towards enemies, inflicting madness on them, a status not very many things are immune to. This mod only works when you're aiming down sights, so with the Bonesaw, it's perfect as we're going to be aiming down sights 75% of the game. You then get madness and acid damage over time, which will help out for bosses big time. Also, I noticed that statuses can break bosses and sort of trick them into looping the same attack, which this can prevent annoying phase transitions like with the Nightweaver fight. For the mutator on the Tech 22, I run Harmonizer, which increases mod damage and at level 10 generates 25% additional mod power for the stowed weapon. This is going to help keep our acid mod coming back much quicker on our other gun, while making sure that the madness really cuts down health. With these weapons, you're going to have high critical chance, really fast fire rate, and incredible damage. There really isn't anything that feels impossible to take down with this setup, and with loads of flying enemies stopping certain things from being useful, this one's going to take them down every time. For our rings and amulet, we can do a couple of things. However, this setup here works for me most of the time. Anka of Power grants us 15% more damage all the time. After taking a relic, you get 15% more. This is easily one of the best amulets for any build, as it's very easy to maintain that extra damage. Take a relic right before a fight, and then each time you see an opening, take another. On harder difficulties, you rely less on healing anyway, as one hit's gonna kill you most of the time. Burden of the Gambler. This was a ring from the first game, and it's actually what makes this build work. Putting it on completely takes away your ability to hit weak spot damage. Instead, you're going to get 10% more critical chance and 20% more critical damage. Really playing into our critical hits being our best form of damage and getting rid of the skill required to hit enemies in the correct spots. Stone of Malevolence is easily one of the best rings in the game right now. It generates 15% additional mod power when using elemental damage. In boss fights, this alone makes sure that you always have the acid on your weapon, which lets you fully reload the weapon and gain top-notch critical chance the entire time. If you do feel like it's going to get nerfed eventually or simply want something else, the constant variable ring is nice as well. Better range damage when your weapon overheats, which the Bonesaw does happen to do. Probability Cord is a must-have as it increases crit damage by 30%. I don't really think I need to explain why that's insanely good for the build, because much more damage is always better. Stone of Balance is the last ring that you're going to need. This one has a low increase, but we're increasing both of our mods, our guns, and skill damage. So rather than just 7%, you get quite a bit more. With all these trinkets, you have really high damage no matter where you hit the boss, and the mod regen is quite good, keeping your best abilities active all the time. This setup works on anything, but it's really optimized for bosses, so keep that in mind when switching things for different fights. Finally, we come to the traits, and as I said in my last video, this matters very little. We get ammo reserves and long shot from our classes, and then vigor, endurance, spirit, and expertise go with every single setup. I always run bark skin and siphoner as well, with those two being my favorites, and then anything extra goes into triage. So how does this build do in combat? Very, very well. You're essentially going to do the exact same thing before every tough encounter. Activate Eye Gazer, eat a relic, jump into the fight. Activate Acid, and then Hunter's Shroud. Once the Acid runs out, you can use Bullet Storm to get high damage and better mod regen. If you have the Stone of Malevolence ring on, you can use Bullet Storm on top of the Acid, as it will always be active. Using the mod and Bullet Storm, you never reload the gun, and can hit crits for a long time. Switch to the Tech 22 when you need to cool down your weapon more and are waiting on skill cooldowns. Once you get a nice groove going, the build feels very solid and is going to take down bosses quickly. Like I already said, you cannot hit weak spots with this build, so just spray and pray, always getting the best damage that you can. I particularly like this for elites, as you can mow them down before they even get to you. The damage over time along with high range damage makes this build great for any encounter. The Acid is a must for extra critical hits, and it seems to be really good against a lot of enemies. I beat the Nightweaver with this one much faster than I could on any other build. Since she likes to run away at times, you're always on her with damage. Hopefully you did enjoy this video, and let me know what you think of the build. Getting a good setup for harder modes can be tough, and this one made bosses feel very doable. Thanks for watching the video, and if you would, please leave a like down below. Here's a full breakdown of the build for your convenience, and I'll catch you next time.